So why would two of the world's most powerful financial institutions suddenly decide to do, well, nothing? It's a great question. And the answer, surprisingly, isn't really in Europe at all. You've got to look across the oceans to what's happening in the US and China. So let's dive in and unpack why Europe's central banks seem to be stuck in a holding pattern.
And just so you know where we're getting our info, we're breaking down a really sharp piece from the Wall Street Journal, published on February 2nd, 2026. It does a great job of untangling this complex web of global pressures that policymakers in Europe are dealing with right now.
All right, here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to look at what this economic standstill in Europe is all about. Then, we'll get into the real head-scratcher, the inflation puzzle. After that, we'll explore two massive outside forces that are shaking things up, the US dollar and a huge surge in Chinese imports. And finally, we'll put it all together to see why the banks are hitting pause.
Okay, let's get right to the headline news. You've got two of the biggest players on the world stage, the European Central Bank and the Bank of England, and they are basically hitting the brakes. They're stopping and taking a look around.
What that means is they've decided to keep their key interest rates exactly where they are. No changes. It's this classic wait-and-see approach, and what's interesting is that it comes right after the US Federal Reserve did pretty much the same thing. It's almost like they're all looking at a stormy global economic forecast and deciding, you know what? Better to stay in port for now. But to really get the why behind this, we need to talk about their number one job.
And that job, that mission, brings us straight to what we're calling the inflation puzzle. Because at the end of the day, a central bank's main gig is managing inflation.
So, quick refresher, what is inflation? Well, in the simplest terms, it's how fast the prices for all the stuff you buy, from your morning coffee to a new car, are going up. When inflation gets too high, your money just doesn't stretch as far. The whole point of a central bank is to keep that rate in a kind of Goldilocks zone, not too hot and not too cold.
And they actually have a magic number they're all aiming for, 2%. Yep, for most of the world's major central banks, a 2% annual inflation rate is that sweet spot. It means the economy is healthy, it's growing, but it's not overheating.
But here is the problem. Right now, in the Eurozone, inflation is actually running a little too cool. It finished up last year just a smidge below that crucial 2% target, and this is exactly where those outside factors start to really matter, because forces from way outside Europe are threatening to push that number even lower.
Let's talk about cause number one, the dollar's ripple effect. You know, what happens with the US currency never just stays in the US. It sends waves across the Atlantic. And right now, a weaker dollar is actually causing some major headaches for Europe.
Here's how that works. A weaker US dollar automatically means a stronger euro. And for the European Central Bank, that's a real double-edged sword. First, a strong euro makes all the goods Europe imports from other countries cheaper. Cheaper goods mean lower inflation. At the same time, it makes all the stuff Europe sells out to the rest of the world more expensive. That can hurt demand for European products and, you guessed it, push inflation down even more. It's a real double whammy working against that 2% target.
Okay, so the second major cause is coming from the East. At the same time all this currency stuff is happening, Europe is dealing with a massive surge of low-cost goods coming in from China. And this is just throwing another wrench into the works.
So you might be asking, why now? What's going on? Well, a big part of it is US trade policy. Because of higher American tariffs on Chinese goods, a lot of those exporters had to go find new customers, and they looked straight to Europe. Now, to break into that market and compete, they started cutting their prices and doing it way more aggressively than they have in the past. The result? A flood of cheaper products hitting European shelves, which, just like the stronger euro, puts even more downward pressure on inflation.
So you put those two things together, a strong euro making imports cheaper and a flood of low-cost Chinese goods, and you can see the dilemma. These global forces are creating a real policy puzzle, and it's forcing the banks into this holding pattern.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Policymakers are talking about this openly. Here's a quote from the governor of the Bank of France who said, flat out, "We are closely monitoring the dollar's depreciation. It is one of the factors that will guide our monetary policy." That tells you just how seriously they are taking these external pressures.
Now, it's worth pointing out the situation isn't exactly the same everywhere. For the Eurozone and the ECB, inflation is already a little too low, so they're really feeling the pressure. Over in the UK, things are a bit different. Inflation there is actually higher. So while the Bank of England is facing these same global headwinds, their internal debate is a bit more about when to cut interest rates, not if they should.
And if you want to see just how big this challenge is, just look at the ECB's own forecast. Their own economists are predicting they won't hit that 2% inflation target this year or even next year. They're projecting it's going to take until 2028 to get back on track. That's a long time to wait.
So when you add it all up, Europe's central banks are really caught between a rock and a hard place. With a strong euro and a flood of cheap imports, both pushing inflation down, they're really hesitant to do anything that might push it even lower. For now, it seems their only real move is to sit tight, wait, and see how these powerful global currents shift.
And really, this all leads to a much bigger question, doesn't it? In a world that is this hyper-connected, how much control does any single central bank truly have over its own backyard? When the global winds are blowing this hard, can they really steer their own ship? It's definitely something to think about.